I grew into digital design through Photoshop. I want to do a little morning exercise. I want to know, show of hands, who else had the same experience growing up through Photoshop? Okay. At the same time, maybe a little bit beforehand, I was doing a little bit of Paint. Anyone have the same experience? Microsoft Paint, maybe 98, 97? Okay, this one, don't be shy. For who here was Sketch, the first design tool that they got into design software with? All right, a couple hands. Any other big ones that I'm missing? Flash? Fireworks? Director. Okay, everyone's saying digital stuff. Well, who's still using any of these tools? Because I definitely am. Yeah, every day for me as well. I'm using at least one of these. Like Usher said, my name's Danny. I work at Kickstarter, but I've been involved in the tool space in the last couple of years and been lucky enough to work on some of them directly. I always think back, though, that it's pretty fascinating that these tools, or at least a lot of the ones that we've just talked about, are either print design tools or, in the case of Sketch, Flash, Fireworks, Director, these things kind of evolved either directly or indirectly from print design tools, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, because all the way back, Gutenberg, 7th century China, before that, movable type, the printing press, all of these tools that we're using, even throughout to desktop publishing, they're coming from a world where designers set the type, they mix the colors, they handle the paper stock. We kept on using these print tools all the way through digital, except when those of us who went to make digital things, we started to make models, high-fidelity models of the actual thing, instead of in the old days when we actually, did everything from start to finish. I think we always kind of knew this, and then tools like the original Framer didn't really help us kind of realize, like, you know what, this is kind of backward. And then there was that kind of ridiculous question of 2016, should designers code? To be clear, I think if it wasn't clear, I think this is kind of a bad question because it just equates code as another one of these tools to make models, and that's the extent of it. But actually, there's something really interesting about it, and I think maybe this is something that the design community got maybe before I did, but once I kind of stewed on it a little while, I'm kind of reflecting on it now, especially with Framer X. At its core, it's about code. So it's not really should designers code, it's how do we work with code? Do we interact with the tools with code directly? Do we do that through an interface like Framer, or if you're a sound designer, something else? I think that is actually the power of where we are right now, because it doesn't matter what we use, we're recognizing as a community that we're pushing and pulling to and from the same source as our engineers. We're more like the games industry, where they have level designers, lighting specialists, engineers, PMs. All of us can kind of work in the same fashion now and build upon each other's work. It's kind of hard to visually represent this, so I did the best analogy I could think of. Has anyone seen this show before? So if you're unfamiliar with it, it is Queer Eye. These 5 guys are the Fab Five. You got Bobby on design, Karamo on lifestyle and culture, Anthony on food, Jonathan grooming, and Tan on fashion. So I guess we need to be one of those 5. Which one are we? I would say Bobby, because we're designers, right? You can choose whichever one you want. So they kind of do something similar, except code isn't their medium, it's a human being. And they're pushing and pulling this human. They all have their individual expertise, their own tools, their own disciplines. Yet instead of kind of doing one at a time, then handing off, Anthony will come in and see Jonathan give the guy a haircut and be like, wow, like now it's my turn to like up the game with cooking. There's this kind of like back and forth always. And if you've seen an episode, it's actually not about the haircut or the house that's the most interesting part, at least to me. It's actually kind of what happens on the output of the show. At the end of each episode, that person's life has been completely transformed. And it's that surrounding context that I want to talk about. Because whilst all of this has been going on in design in terms of our workflow and our tooling being disrupted, actually the things that we make from the tools has been completely changed. Software is definitely eating the world. Think about the way that you last rented a movie, you said happy birthday to someone, how you went on that last date. All of these things we're disrupting through what we do. It can be kind of overwhelming, especially for me. In the last couple of years, I've been reflecting on this a lot. But luckily, we're not the first design discipline to go through this. Anyone know where this is? It's the Bijlmermeer. It's an example from a time when the design of built environment actually had a really similar trifecta as what we do in design, in product design. Tooling, obviously reinforced concrete, but more importantly, their audience was general urbanization in the world. You had, especially in Europe, post-war cities that needed restructuring, and architecture as a practice went through a remit change. Like our new seat at the table, architects became formally responsible for the health and the safety of the people who interacted with and inhabited the buildings that they designed. So the Bijlmermeer is a specific approach to urban design. I think it's actually one that we could go down if, not something I think we're doing right now, but if we were to focus only on our toolkits and not actually think about the surrounding context. Because this approach is one that is an unrelenting belief on technological progress being the thing that advances or solves the human condition. It sounds kind of weird, and I guess the poster boy of this movement, Le Corbusier, was kind of weird if you ever have seen any of his work. He wrote a book called The Radiant City, amongst others. He had his vision for what high modernity was whilst overlooking Paris in an aeroplane. And I think that speaks volumes about high modernity as a philosophy, which is if things can be standardized and made perfect from a technological point of view, then they should be able to be duplicated down to the screw size across the world wherever it should be implemented. So he wrote the book, The Radiant City. He's also one of those designers who just is like one of those designers that does a bit of everything, that it has his hand in every kind of discipline. So he's left us a lot of artifacts. This is his rendition of a future Buenos Aires. Funny angle, yeah? All the way back from the sea. This one he did, I think after coming down from an airplane in Rio de Janeiro. And if you've been to Rio, you know it's pretty geographically gnarly. So this kind of expressway or aqueduct type thing is pretty amazing. And this one kind of breaks my heart. If you've been to Paris, maybe it does to yours too. This is his blueprint for the Radiant City, but specifically applied to Paris. You can see in the distance you have these high-rise buildings that are the designer perfect ways, or perfect places rather, to work. In the mid to foreground, you have these medium-rise buildings that are the perfect places to live. And then kind of in the middle here, we have these massive vistas of parks for people to play. And then superhighways to get between all three of these, because there's no concept of a sidewalk or a footpath or a house-facing street. He also left us this, which kind of goes into detail with the sizes of his super blocks compared to blocks that exist back then and also today. So Paris, New York, Buenos Aires. So the Bijlmermeer wasn't by Le Corbusier, but it was definitely done in his footsteps and in the footsteps of high modernity. I think the intentions of the designers of the Bijlmermeer and Le Corbusier were actually quite good. It was about improving the human condition. And in hindsight, it's kind of easy to realize that maybe it was a little naive, because this kind of designing from above is actually the antithesis of what people need in design. Because we are complex beings, we're not as simple as having something very regimented given to us. And there's funny examples. There's stories about the Bijlmermeer, and in Brasilia, an actual city built in the same way as well, where people couldn't find their apartment or they couldn't set a meeting place with someone just because of the way these things were built. But there's actually kind of more severe, real examples of how this architecture and how this type of design and workflow has failed people. This was Pruitt-Igoe in the US, in St. Louis. It was a housing development. It was built from a blank slate. As you can see, it's kind of cleared away land in the center. The surrounding buildings are tenement buildings. I think to really understand why it was a failure, you have to think about that, the things that are replaced. Designers had a blank slate. They had this land cleared and they put in these kind of Le Corbusier Radiant City style super blocks that were the perfect places to live, with enough green space, ventilation, and air, all the things that were technologically deemed to be important at the time. But the tenement buildings that they replaced, I live in New York, by the way, so I like to use New York examples. This is Hester Street. I think it still kind of looks a little bit like this in the Lower East Side. These are the type of buildings that Pruitt-Igoe replaced. You can see these mixed-use type buildings with people hanging out the front. There's shops, there's houses up those stoops, there's people selling things on the street. This one's around the corner, I think maybe a little bit closer to Alphabet City. These kids are mucking around with a fire hydrant. They're not at school, they're not at home, but they're not in a defined playground. This kind of living, this kind of sidewalk-facing street is complex, and it's seemingly chaotic because it is, and because we are. But it's also quite hard for designers to map and to systemize these sort of things. Combine that with some socioeconomic problems, like in St. Louis in that particular part, and you have yourself a situation where this kind of design or urban environment is to blame for people's problems and then gets wiped out and gets replaced by a type of design that actually got demolished and then shown on TV. I don't think there's a Pruitt-Igoe or Bijlmermeer or Brasilia of product design yet, but I do worry though that the failures of these designers are ones that we could make if we're not too careful with thinking about our surrounding context. In our world, we have to simplify and systemize just to be able to work with our design tools and our computers. And then to design something that goes into someone's hand that they can kind of peck away at. But I'm an optimist about this because I think we're actually in a really good position to handle this and with our new workflows. This is one of my personal heroes. Her name is Jane Jacobs. She was a professional writer, but also an activist and an expert in what makes good urban environments. One of my favorite passages from her is, "The best way to plan for downtown is to see how people use it today." It's obviously different degrees to this, but it turns out even the easy one has a lot of wins for us. And being a design conference, design tools conference, I'm sure a lot of you already do this with injecting data into avatars and strings, but there's actually a whole lot of different degrees we can do this within the easy degree. Because if we inform our interfaces inherently from whatever our downtowns are, it produces something that actually reflects the people that we're making it for. This also can extend itself to using the same hardware, the same software, and the same network speeds even as the people you're designing for. Because at least in my case, it actually is pretty different to what I use. But of course, to be more true to Jane Jacobs, those of us who can, we ultimately should be able to leave the office and take our increasingly mobile and remote setup and physically embed ourselves in the communities that we're designing for. It can be hard to justify sitting on a park bench to your colleagues and your bosses maybe, but that kind of ethnographic research or just soaking that kind of thing up is invaluable. And like designing with data, this should inform what we're doing from the very beginning and not be something that we stress test or do at the very end. I have another New York example. I think it's actually a really fun one. Another show of hands if you've been to New York before. Okay, keep your hand up if you've been to Times Square. Keep your hand up if you enjoyed Times Square. Okay, so this was Times Square. It still kind of looks like this from some angles. This is one day in 2009. The then Transport Commissioner and her team, they, as an experiment, shut down 5 blocks to cars. They went to the local hardware store, picked up some paint and some lawn chairs, and set them out. People turned it up, started to hang out, they had to go back and buy some more lawn chairs. This temporary plaza was so successful, it was eventually made permanent. I'm showing you this because this is an artifact of the design of built environment, kind of learning from its past and making ramifications, making changes. This design process was informed by city data, prototypes on the cheap, with cheap materials, and involved a whole mix of people to get right. That kind of brings me to my last point, and admittedly, this is one that I didn't consciously seek out. It was one that I just happened to discover through experience. And it sounds obvious, but only by having different people on our teams do we really have the diversity of thought that we need to make things that really resonate with our different audiences. I think our new tooling allows for this more than ever as well. And especially in this room, as a Framer conference, I think as the makers and as the advocates, as the users and as the stewards of these tools, we're actually maybe responsible for making sure our tools are as open to our non-traditional designer teammates, but also our non-designer teammates too. I've given a lot of flack to high modernity, but it was a legitimate response to what was happening in the world. 50, 60 years ago. Whether we kind of realize it or not, what we're making now is impacting the world pretty severely, good and bad. It's used by people now to decide who to vote for or how or why to take action on a complex issue like climate change. People use what we make to meet their life partners, like I said, and as their primary form of communication. This is a lot, but ultimately, I'm an optimist about this. Because our digital medium has something that the design of built environment doesn't have. And it's why places like the Bijlmermeer or Brasilia are still around in their more or less flawed form. It takes generations to suffer through and then eventually renew, modify, or replace bad urban design. But in our world, we can make strides. We can go to our streets, design from below, and put it in people's hands next week. And then we can do the same thing the week after. So I'm actually excited about where we are right now, and I hope you are too. So enjoy the rest of the loop. Thank you.